Well, hi everybody, just Rusty here, and today I'm going to embark on first the routine subject matter that I call organizing and packing. Now, I just want to emphasize this is my routine. The reason I present it is so that you may, have some of your own thoughts on how your routine will be. It'll probably be very different from mine, but maybe you'll be thinking of some of the same things. So before we get started, I want to review a comment that I got. A nice comment I got from a viewer. Her name is Steps by Kache, and forgive me if I pronounced that poorly, Steps. I think before I get into the comment itself, and I'm only going to show part of it right here, we'll get to the whole comment later. Please go out and check out her YouTube video. She is based in Europe and has some beautiful videos of hiking in Europe. I mean, it makes me want to hop on a plane and get right out there. My European hiking experience has really just been day hikes on the Spanish Mediterranean coast. And some of the hills there, they were day hikes with nothing more than a water bottle with me. So she's got a beautiful channel, very professionally done, and I just encourage everybody to go out there who's watching this to go out and check out her channel. I want to put this delicately. She seems to be the same generation as I am, so we address some of the same, we have the same types of concerns. So this was part of her comment. I also use some stuffed sacks, but not too many because they do weigh a bit by themselves. So that makes me think, well, does worrying about the weight of stuffed sacks seem silly? Well, as an engineer, I check things out. I measure things all the time. So I said, well, I'm going to go measure and weigh my stuffed sacks. So I weighed what I call optional stuffed sacks or general stuffed sacks, ones that I organize stuff that would otherwise be loose, and they came out to 7 ounces. And then a lot of equipment comes with stuffed sacks. Your sleeping bag, your tent, your sleeping pad, your pillow, cook set. These things come with their own stuffed sacks. And I weighed the ones that I basically always bring with me, and that was another 7 ounces. So that's 14 ounces. That's nearly a pound of stuffed sacks. And let's put that in perspective. If my base weight is 16.5 pounds, this 14 ounces is just over 5% of my weight on my pack. And you might think, well, that's not too bad. But if I told you my goal was to reduce my backpack weight by 10%, you might say, oh yeah, that sounds like quite a bit. Well, the stuffed sacks themselves could get me halfway there if I were willing to go without them. So then the question comes up, well, how do I organize? Well, in fact, I do use stuffed sacks, and I do use those 14 ounces of stuffed sacks, but it's a conscious decision. What I warn people against is just having things happen by default. Consciously make that trade-off decision. Yes, it's 14 ounces. It helps me a lot when I'm out on the trail. So this is what I think about when I'm organizing. I have to think about finding items in my pack, how I use items on the trail, packing neatly and compactly and consistently. I want the pack to not be unbalanced, leaning too much in one direction or the other, tugging on my shoulders the wrong way. And I want to be able to reproduce a successful packing every time. And then I want, of course, how I pack to support my other routines, my trail routine, my camp routine, my watering routine, all those other routines that I'll be talking about in this series. So you may remember from my equipment series backpack video that I kind of divide my equipment into 4 categories. And I'm using the word equipment loosely here. Food is equipment in this discussion. I have the constant access items in my A pockets. These are the pockets on the side as marked here. That's my water bottle. That's my backup reserve water bottle. It's my food and important part of the routine. And when I say food, I mean like trail bars and stuff that I'm going to munch during the day. I've taken them out of my food pack and put them there because I'm setting up for the day's hike. And or at least as important, is a small trash bag to put in the wrappers and all those sort of things that come up that I just want. I got to get them. You got to carry them out. I want to make sure that they don't fall on the trail, so I have a small Ziploc bag for that, just to keep those things under control. Then there's B, the immediate access items, and those are the things that I put in what I'll call the front of the pack. I'm going to say the back of the pack is the part of the pack that goes to my back, so that's the orientation I'm going to use from now on. And I put things in the mesh that I'm going to need immediate access to, but I don't mind taking off the pack to get to them. Those are things like my water filter, my rain suit, toilet paper, bug spray, a bug net, and sunblock. Now, I mean, I think it's self-explanatory why I want to get to my rain suit, quickly. If it starts to rain. The bug spray, bug net, kind of the same thing. The sunblock and maybe the water filter, you say, well, do you really need quick access to those? Well, I know myself, if I don't have quick access to the sunscreen, for example, I'm going to convince myself I really don't need it. And we know how that's gone. I mean, I didn't do it intentionally. I didn't make that decision when I got the second-degree burns all over my legs, but that's the last thing I want to see have happen again, is to be hiking and not get sunblock on when I'm above tree line, or like in Pennsylvania, hiking across a lot of fields. Same thing with the water. Getting the water out can be inconvenient. Getting the filter out, if getting the filter out is inconvenient also, I might rely too much on my reserve water and then end up running out of water. Like I could have filled up at that stream, but I convinced myself I was too much trouble. So I just know myself. I don't want those things happening to me. Then in C, what's marked C here is my camp priority, which is my tent. The first thing I want to do is, when I get to a camp, is determine whether I'm going to need the tent or not, or if I'm going to use the shelter. If I'm going to use the tent, I need to set it up right away, especially if it's going to rain. Another item that's not really marked on here, but it's the C category, are my camp flip-flops. Those are also attached on the sides above the letter A there, on each side. And I want to keep them outside of the pack, the interior of the pack, just because I don't want the interior of the pack to get dirty from them. Plus, I will need quick access to them, because when I get to camp, or when I talk about my routine, I want to kick off my shoes and get to work setting up camp. And then finally, D is everything else, and that's the interior of the pack. So I have some general stuff sacks that I use, and they're color coded, and they're color coded in an arbitrary way. I mean, I remember it now because I started using them, and that's what I use. I have a food stuff sack, rather large one. Let's get that right. Yeah, here's my food stuff sack. I have a secondary food one. I call it a food one, but it's what I put my utensils in and my drink mix. When I talk about my hiking routine, I do like to have some Propel and electrolytes. An aged person like me needs those. And those are things I need to be able to count. So I usually put them in a little plastic Ziploc bag inside of this. The next one is my rain clothes. Go in a red one. It doesn't have to be water type. I mean, it's rain gear. Its idea is to get wet. Also red are my camp clothes, and the way I keep those distinguishes that this is actually, the camp clothes are actually going inside the D part of my backpack as opposed to the B mesh. Plus, this is the style that's got that, a roll top, and you squeeze the air out, and it keeps things pretty dry. Then I have my clean hiking clothes, which go in this orange bag. I think that's right. Do I have it upside down? I guess I have it upside down. It goes into this, and then my hiking clothes that are going to need to be washed go into this one. And the sum total of these two is always the same, because clothes are either clean and haven't been worn yet, or they're dirty, I've already worn them, and they move from one pack to the other. And sometimes I even keep this inside of that. But it's just a way for me to organize and keep things straight. And then finally I have the electronics bag, ditty bag some people call it. I've actually keep this kind of loaded up. And that's what this looks like. It's actually got a few extra things in there just for storage at home. But this blue pack, again, I know I have other blue packs, but this is substantially different in size and shape, so that there's never any ambiguity as to what's in it. So that's my generic, I'll say, general sacks. And then there's the specialty sacks, and those are the ones that come with the equipment. I'm not going to pull those out, but my sleeping bag has a compression sack. My sleeping pads has a sack, and the pillow has a sack. And what I do is, when I get into camp routine, you'll see why this is important to me, is I actually put the pillow sack inside the sleeping pad sack and then put the sleeping pad in, so those things stay together. My cook kit has a sack. I have a Ziploc bag for the fuel because I use the solid fuel and that stuff is kind of stinky. I want to keep it in something airtight so that the chemical smell doesn't permeate all my stuff. I have a tent sack, and you saw that is marked with a C on it's the big yellow one at the bottom of my pack. And I also have a tent stake sack. My tent stakes came in a sack, and I put that, and I also put my clothesline bear hang line in there, and those actually get stuffed inside the sack, the yellow sack, along with the tent. And again, when I go over camp routine, I actually explain why that's the case. I have a filter sack. The filter came with a sack. It's kind of a mesh sort of thing. And then toilet paper in a Ziploc bag, waterproof. If you've ever gotten your toilet paper wet, you know how useless that can be. So those are the sacks that I use to keep myself organized. Few things are not in sacks. You remember I had a hygiene kit and a first aid kit. They were both in hard plastic old Gatorade containers, Gatorade powder mix containers. One of them, the first aid kit, easily identifiable because it had some duct tape around it. And by the way, that duct tape is also a useful item to have. I mean, sometimes you have to repair things and use duct tape, so that's why I use that. My mess kit is a kind of a solid thing. It doesn't need to be in a stuff sack. I don't bring it all the time, but when I do bring it, I don't bother with a stuff sack. The loose items in my mesh pocket, well, they are contained within the mesh pocket, so they don't need a sack. My wallet, my phone, and any maps I have with me, I keep in my pockets while I'm hiking. My trekking poles, I obviously are using while I'm trekking along. My water bottle, which is my reserve water bottle, which is usually just an old Gatorade bottle, and the water bladder don't end up in stuff sacks. The water bladder actually goes inside the pack. And I mentioned my camp shoes. Those are kind of attached to the outside. So that's kind of how I organize all these things. So when I'm packing my backpack, all these considerations I talked about, come into play. And I kind of think of them as layers. So, when you're packing the pack, you're going from the bottom up. So at my bottom layer, I have a sleeping bag, my padded pillow, and that fuel. And the colors here just kind of indicate the colors of the exterior sacks, just to show you that, hey, I do remember these things. So that's the first layer. That's kind of a layer that doesn't change in composition too much. Yeah, I am using the fuel, but that's maybe the squishy part, but the rest of it's pretty solid. They're always in the same place. The next layer is my clothes. My clean ones and my dirty ones, like I said, they take up the same amount of room. They are squishable, I guess if that's a word. And that's nice because now, after that first layer, we're getting to the part of my pack with the arc in it. And I need to be able to mold this equipment around that arc. So that's why I do that. And be thinking about this. The sleeping bag, pillow, fuel, I don't need those until I get to camp. That's why they're at the bottom. I'm not going to need access to them. Mostly the same thing with the clothes. I can imagine that if I were to get something wet and I needed to change, that's an exceptional circumstance. Hardly ever happens. But, the clothes are there next. The layer above that are my camp clothes and my cook kit, because normally when I come into camp, that might be some of the things that I want to get out first. Not the cook kit so much, but my camp clothes I might want to get out. And the next layer up, and the cook kit, by the way, is kind of a solid thing. It doesn't change its shape or form too much, so I'm trying to get past, where the arch, the thin part of the arch is. The next layer is my electronics bag and the two kits. And again, now you'll see that my first aid kit is pretty close to the top. So that I can get to it if I do hurt myself, but I'm in a situation where I can at least treat myself. It's right there. And then finally at the top is the food. And the real reason I put the food at the top is because that is something that changes in weight and shape and everything. And I want everything below it to be consistent. I want it to be as consistent from the bottom up as far as I can get it. And then the kind of malleable, the changeable stuff, which is the food, because you eat it as you go along and then you refill it and now it's back up to full and you eat it as you go along. That's at the top. So those are my packing layers. It's a convenient system for me. Yours may be different, but I don't forget things. And I'll get more into that when I get into my camp routine, but I don't think there's a hiker out there who hasn't, before they had a well-developed routine, ended up leaving something behind at a camp. And I did that. I told that story how I left my bear hanging rope on my first day out on the trail. Unfortunately, another hiker, Bad Mojo, came to my rescue on that one. So here's my final thoughts. The choices I make, in some cases, like the colors of the sacks, are arbitrary, but the reason's really not. I mean, the reason that I have these arbitrary choices made and kind of set in wet concrete, I mean, I can't change them, is because that consistency helps my routine out on the trail. The consistency minimizes mishaps, like forgetting things at camp. Like I already mentioned in the previous slide, yeah, you can end up forgetting things, and kind of, you know, most things are replaceable. Maybe you can put up with it until you get to a hostel or a resupply point, but I hate leaving things behind. That rope I left behind, that was something Darlene found for me, and you know, whenever she finds something nice for me and I can think of her while I'm using it, and now that's lost forever. Somebody in Pennsylvania has my rope. And like I said, supports my other routines. So before we close, let's take a look at the entire comment that we got from Steps by Katja. And she was commenting on my previous, my introduction to the routine. She said, I think this was interesting. When I pack, I try to put everything away the same way so I don't have to look for things. And I have my routines when I'm out. So I'm not the only person. I'm very glad. I was so happy to get this comment because it kind of reinforces what I've been saying. There's a reason we pack the same way every time, and there's a reason why we have routines. And then she mentions also later in this comment, after talking about the weight of the potential weight of the stuff sacks, is that she's trying to cut down the weight. Happy that her tent doesn't weigh half of the one she had in the 90s. Well, I'll tell you, back in the 70s, my tent was 7.5 pounds. My new tent, the one that I use now, is actually a little heavier than it needs to be, but it is about 1/5 of that to 1/4 of that. So, the weight, just mentioning this again, the weight of things has come down considerably over the years. So that's it for how I organize my equipment. And next we'll be getting into some of the routines that I actually follow.